Take control of your day with time management expert Megan Sumrell on today's episode. Today's episode is brought to you by ClickUp. In today's digital world, keeping track of all your tasks, projects, and employees can become overwhelming. Use the same project management tool that I use for my team for free. Servemaster.com/ClickUp.
Are you tired of dealing with your boss? Do you feel underpaid and underappreciated? If you want to make it online, fire your boss and start living your retirement dreams now, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Serve No Master Podcast, where you'll learn how to open new revenue streams and make money while you sleep. Presented live from a tropical island in the South Pacific by best-selling author Jonathan Green. Now, here's your host.
Now, I'm really excited to talk about this topic because time management is an area where I am terrible. So I'm really interested, I guess, in how your journey began, how you first decided, hey, this is my passion. I want to be known for time management.
Yeah, it certainly was not the answer to the question that I was asked in third grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? Time management expert was not what came rolling out. It actually, I think for so many of us that start our own businesses, it came out of a personal need. I had been working in the corporate tech arena for over 20 years. And my area of expertise there was really going into large scale software organizations and teaching them how to basically create harmony out of chaos. So I have a lot of training and background in continuous improvement, process improvement, optimizations, tons of certifications around that, and got to a stage in life where I was a new mom juggling a full-time career, a toddler, and was realizing that all of the kind of traditional, more corporate type time management strategies just weren't working for me anymore. Had a very pivotal day when my daughter was about 3, when I had her at the park and the woman next to me just casually asked, "What do you do for fun?" And I realized I didn't have an answer, and I couldn't remember the last time I had done anything for fun. It was pretty much wake up, work, rinse, repeat, try and get through the task list. So I set out on a way personally to solve this problem for myself, applying all of the principles and trainings I had, devoted my life to for 20 years, and put it towards how do I manage and plan my time and calendar. Friends and family started noticing, like, wow, you look rested, you look so much happier, what are you doing? So I started teaching some local business owners here in the North Carolina area. And after seeing their successes, I realized this really was what my calling in life was. And so I left my corporate career behind, and I have been fully invested in this ever since.
It sounds like an amazing journey, and often the best inventions come from things that we need in our own lives. What do you think most people get wrong when it comes to building their own schedules? Why do most people mismanage their own time?
Yeah, I think the biggest failure that I see, and unfortunately it's one that the planning and productivity community themselves are kind of spearheading. Well, there's actually 2 things. The first is this constant approach of working from a daily schedule or a daily task list, meaning you start each day asking the question, like, what do I need to get done today? And if you are starting your day in that state, whether you realize it or not, it's kind of too late, and you're going to be stuck in a state of reaction all day long, where what you're going to be tackling is the next thing that you're thinking of, right? So if I wake up and kind of go, okay, what do I need to do today? I'm going to haphazardly create a list. It's probably not going to be prioritized. It's not going to be very intentional, and I'm not going to maximize efficiencies by maybe doing things in a certain order or grouping things together. But unfortunately, so many people teach this style of wake up, do your brain dump, circle your top 3, and then we're somehow supposed to magically just focus on those top 3 until they're done and then work on everything else. When the fact is, so many of us, particularly if you're a business owner, we're living such integrated lives, right? Where we don't go into an office and sit down, where we have 8 hours of uninterrupted time just to work. So one of the fundamental shifts that I like to really encourage people to make, and it's the foundation of everything I teach, is to step away from this daily planning, daily task list life and move into a weekly planning structure where we actually map out our entire week ahead of time, creating specific routines to maximize efficiencies there. The second real failure is this push for work-life balance. That seems to be the movement that everyone's getting behind. And what's interesting is whenever you Google work-life balance to look for, images around it, what you're actually seeing is people who are multitasking. So you'll see the picture of maybe the parent holding their kid while they're working and they're both smiling and having a great time. Like, that's not reality for most of us. Or you're seeing somebody who's working while grocery shopping or caregiving while, doing something else. And so we keep saying balance, but what we're subtly telling people is you need to be doing everything equally, because that's what balance means, is equal. So this quest for what I think the intent of work-life balance was a good one, which was, hey, we need to make sure we're not, constantly working 24/7. What we're actually starting to teach people is that you need to be doing multiple things at once all day long in order to be successful. And that's just a recipe for burnout.
It's really interesting. So I think what people really want is work-life separation, right? A barrier between when you're at home and when you're working. So it's the exact opposite of what
Absolutely.
the picture
Yeah.
show. Yeah, it is interesting because there's always these new big ideas and trends. And I remember when everyone was like, multitasking is going to change the world. And then every study 5 years out later came out and said, multitasking means you're
Like,
terrible at
worst thing
everything.
ever.
It's like, do everything okay and
Yeah.
nothing great, multitasking. And I'm very interested because a lot of people I talk to have really different ways of scheduling their days. I know some people that have their days scheduled out to the minute. And sometimes I interview people like that.
Yeah.
It gives me shivers. That's my nightmare. That's the exact opposite of the way I
Yeah.
live my life because I never know what's going to happen. So, for example, what if I'm having a great conversation with you and I go, oh, I have you back to back with my next podcast interview. You got to go, right? You can't do an effective job. And so I often see people schedule that way. Most of my family's lawyers, and they schedule their day out every 3 minutes. The way they bill is every 180 seconds is a billing cycle. So they have to constantly write down what they're doing. If you go to the bathroom, it has to be 3 minutes or 6 minutes. It can't be 5 minutes because that's not how you bill.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It's like, exactly. My sister loves it. It's my nightmare. And so I've always been interested in people that are total heavy schedulers. And so I wonder, there's so many systems now. There's all these different time management systems and they're huge amounts of time to master it and learn it. And I wonder how does someone know what's the right system for them? Because I did notice on your website, a lot of your language says it's time management for women. And I wonder if there's a difference between the way men and women approach time. So I'd be interested in that as well.
Yeah. So for me, I don't think it's so much that men and women, in my experience, approach time differently. It's that our brains are wired differently. Neither one's better, neither one's worse. It's just different. I think we can all agree on that. And typically for most of the women that I work with, I used to mistakenly say women are better multitaskers than men, which is a completely untrue statement. And my husband proves that to the fullest with his job. But what I realized, the message I was trying to get across, is women tend to carry more roles or kind of the emotional load of the household, typically more than the male counterpart does, in terms of running all of the scheduling, particularly if they have children. So running all of the scheduling for the doctors, the dentists, the orthodontists, the pediatricians, the which days are off, all of that. And so knowing that typically there is one person in the household that is kind of managing that takes a whole new level of things that need to be considered when you're planning and managing your time. And so it's not so much that we approach time differently. We're just juggling different types of roles and responsibilities. And so for most women and for a number of men that also don't want to have their day planned out, we need to create plans that allow us to feel confident at the start of the week that, hey, the most important things are going to get done. I have a clear path to do it. I have wiggle room if I need it. And then most importantly, I have the right level of flexibility built into my schedule based on my current stage of life. So I know I've had stages of life where I could pretty much predict how my day was going to go. Things weren't going to come in and interrupt me. I am currently in a stage of life where that is not my reality. And so I need to have a planning system that accommodates exactly how much uncertainty do I need to build in. But more importantly is to have a planning system that you can use as your life goes through all those different cycles. So this is really at the foundation of the planning system I've put in place is one that, hey, if you want to schedule out every minute of your day, you can use this system and do that. But if that is not working for you and that's not the reality of your life right now, you can still use this same system, but the output, what your weekly plan looks like versus what mine looks like, are going to be completely different because our inputs are completely different. And so to me, that's really the test of a great system is, can you put in different inputs, use the same system, and then create unique outputs for each person? So that's really what I have been kind of laser focused on for the last several years.
So there's a wall a lot of entrepreneurs hit. Every entrepreneur, they start throwing job or side hustles, a lot of people call it now, and the first dream is to quit their main job. And you go from having 2 hours a day to having 8 hours a day, and their productivity collapses. This is the same thing that happened about 6 years ago. Everyone was becoming a travel blogger. And as soon as travel bloggers were stopped treating it like a business and the blog collapsed, that's why there's almost no active travel blogs right now. So people have this, it's almost like more available time. It's the curse of getting what you want. That more available time means you go, oh, I've got 8 hours to do it instead of 2 hours, and your efficiency drops and your focus level drops. How can people prepare for that? And what's the best way to handle that, like shock to the system? Because you think more time, I'll get 4 times more work done. But usually you get the same amount of work done in 4 times as much time.
Yeah. And I think especially when you make that first transition, right? Of, okay, I've been working a full-time job and building this business on the side. And then finally you go all into the business. First, recognize, give yourself some space to catch back up. Chances are you are exhausted at that stage. I don't know any entrepreneur, myself included, that didn't, when you finally make that push and now you're not building 2 things at once, give yourself a little breathing room right out of the gate to kind of rest and recover as you move into the next stage of now full-time business owner. I think that the complaint or the problem that I hear so many people talking about, which is exactly what you are, is we procrastinate, right? Because like before, it's like, well, I've only got 2 hours, and you knew that. So it's like, well, I got to get it done or it doesn't happen. Now suddenly you look at this expansive day and you wake up at 9 a.m. and you're like, well, I'm not in the mood to do that. I'll quote, do it later. Well, later just keeps coming and going and things don't get done. And this is why weekly planning is so critical for people that, like myself, that truly do get to dictate how I'm spending my time. I get to decide at 9 o'clock in the morning if I'm working or not, right? But when you create a weekly plan that accommodates the realities of your current commitments. So what have you already committed to, like this phone call, right? Because we all have those kinds of appointments. We tend to honor those. But then also acknowledging, where do you have pockets of your day where you are awake, you're busy, but you know you can't be working on your business. So for instance, if you are someone that has a family, maybe you've got that pocket of time in the morning from 6 to 8 where you're really busy, but you can't be working on your business because you're breakfast, packing lunches, school, all that kind of stuff. And when we can plug that into our weekly plan with the intent of understanding, how much time do I really have to work? Because we often think, if I were to look at my calendar and just look at my appointments for the week, I might come out of that exercise and say, look, I've got 25 hours to work on my business. But then when I plug in, well, yeah, but I'm always doing this from 6 to 8, or I've got this activity from 3 to 4. And now suddenly I might realize, you know what, I actually only have 12. And so if I only have 12, and then I've got my prioritized tasks for the week with a rough idea of exactly when I'm going to be working on, then what happens on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock when I see that I've scheduled time to maybe write some blog posts, and I'm not in the mood to write blog posts because I don't like writing blog posts, but I look at what I've scheduled out for the rest of my week, I might see, if I don't do this now, there actually isn't a better time for me to do it this week. Or if I move it to do it later, then what I was going to do in that time is now going to get pushed. So we need to create that visual cue for ourselves to understand that there is a domino effect if we continue to put off the things that we don't want to do and constantly live in this state of, I'll get to it later. And so again, this is why I am such an advocate for laying out these weekly plans, because it helps us stay focused as business owners and prevent that kind of procrastination cycle.
So there's a lot of studies that show like people at full-time jobs spend like 6 hours a day checking email. Like they spend 70% of the day doing things that are inefficient. And this is one of the first things I learned, to only check your email once a day. And there's this thing that can happen to people where, especially if you check your email at the start of your day, you're checking your email, then you're checking your social media, and suddenly it's lunchtime. That we lose, and you sit there and you go, I've been at my desk for 4 hours and I couldn't tell you what I've done. There's this lack of a feeling of accomplishment. And the things you've done, they didn't matter. They weren't inefficient. Weren't efficient. How can someone determine maybe the 80-20 or what's the most important thing to be working on? And is it something they should reflect on at the end of the week, or is it something they should try to predict at the start of the week so that they can start to push away the tasks that don't matter? And sometimes, at least for me, sometimes the things I realize that don't matter to my business, like giving them up, it's like, oh, that's my favorite thing to do, but doesn't make any money. That's sometimes a hard conversation to have with yourself.
Yeah, it is. And so that's part of the weekly planning process up front, is really having, and I coach people to have what I call my master backlog. So, and I've got kind of two tasks that we're working from, two categories of tasks that as business owners we work from every single week. One is, these are the recurring things that I do every week or every day that I know matters in my business. These are either the revenue generating or customer satisfaction type things. So maybe you record a podcast every week or write a newsletter every week, all of those rinse and repeat recurring tasks. Then we all have those things that are those projects, right? The new thing that we want to create, the thing that we want to put in place, maybe the book that you want to write or whatever the case may be. And these two, that list of projects or one-off tasks should always be in priority order, so that when you are sitting down, what we want to avoid is in the moment decision making, like, oh, I've got a chunk of time. Let me figure out what I want to work on. Because then we waste 20 minutes trying to decide, and then we're pulling up our phone and now we're staring at Instagram reels for 45 minutes, right? So when we have this prioritized list and when we're creating our weekly plan, we're looking at that, we're saying, okay, here's the top three or five or however many on here. Is there availability for me to work on those these week? And then we start to pencil in, and I always say pencil because life happens, right? Which days, what times we're going to be working on them, so that if suddenly you're presented with a pocket of time and you have time to actually get something done, instead of sitting down and trying to figure out what is it I'm going to work on, you've already identified before the week has even started, these were the things that I intentionally thought through and said are the things that are going to move the needle in my business. Now, with those recurring tasks, as you mentioned, like with email, I am one, I can't just do email once a day, but I do check email 3 times a day, and that's it. And then same with all other messaging type applications. My phone has 0 notifications, and it's actually on mute at all times. You can set up your mobile device. I like to tell people you can set it up so it only talks to you when you've told it that it should. So for me in my life, my phone never flashes and never makes a noise unless it is a family member or a school calling me. This way, anytime I'm sitting down to work, I know if my phone makes a noise, it's because I told it this is important enough to interrupt me. Then I have set pockets of time 3 times a day to go in and check and process my email, go in and check any messaging apps, whether it's DMs on Instagram or Facebook or whatever tools you're using for your business, and it's time blocked. So I do that 3 times a day, 20 minutes a day, and then when that 20 minutes is up, all of those things get shut back down. Email gets turned off again. And for people new to this, it sounds very scary. And they're like, I can't turn off. Like, what if, they're always so worried you're going to miss something. Well, unless you're running a business where you're truly saving lives, you can step away from responding to messages for a few hours, and you'll find that you can process them so much faster doing them all at once than jumping in and out every 15 minutes to respond to those kind of messages.
I remember when I first started in my business, I used to have every email address hooked up to my phone, and I would get the phantom buzz where you think it buzzed, but it didn't, because I was expecting so many messages. And it's interesting because now I'm the same way. My phone's always on mute. The only time I turn on the sound is if I think I turn on the sound maybe once a month if I'm expecting a call in the middle of the night and I don't want to sleep through it. That's the only time. And I don't even have I have several different phones for different projects, and I don't even have my work email on my family phone. And I don't have my personal email on my work phone. And there's this idea we get, especially when you're first starting out, or if you're doing client work, where it's always an emergency. And the thing I learned, and this is a lesson I learned from my dad, who was a lawyer, he's like, it's always an emergency until it's on their desk. And I remember I once had a client, I was working on a project for him. He goes, I need this done. He got me to push another client back. He goes, this is an emergency. I need it done. And it sat on his desk for a full year. He didn't look at the project for an entire 12 months. That was an emergency. So we often think that things are important when they're not. We have a trouble prioritizing or understanding that it's not really an emergency, right? Unless you're a doctor or unless you have something where you have to respond within a minute, like with our tech support chat, you have to respond really quickly because people close the chat bubble within a minute. That's the only thing in my entire business of everything I do where we have to respond quickly. And that's not me managing that bubble anymore. But another thing people do is we go in the other direction. Rather than underworking, we overwork, where we go, oh, I have to finish every project as quickly as I can. And we put in these massive hours and marathons. And I'm guilty of this, of where I'll want to do an entire project and I'll shoot it all in one day. And then I'll be sick for a week. Like I'll get the flu. I used to get the flu all the time from overworking. And it's really hard to quickly create the balance. Like I'm in a place now where, I don't really work on Mondays because it's when I shoot all of my interviews. And so I know I'm doing a lot of videos. It's when I do all my live trainings on Mondays. And so I don't pressure myself. But for a long time, I wouldn't have been 5 years ago, 2 years ago, probably, I wouldn't have been able to do this. So how can people who are at the other end of the spectrum, rather than going, oh, with 8 hours, I'm wasting time, they're going 8 hours, I'm working, guns blazing all day.
20.
I have to grow our business. We have to sacrifice those things
to be successful. Yeah. And I think it's so important for people to realize it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can have an and. You can have a thriving, successful business and be a well-rested, feeling full, well-rounded individual. That's why, the hashtag I use instead of work-life balance is you can have work-life harmony. And harmony means you get to be present in whatever you're doing. You get to be proactive instead of putting out fires, and you get to be purposeful so that meaning you have things for yourself. You can answer the question, what do I do for fun? So if you are currently at that stage where it's just like, go, go, go. And I was there a long time ago. Here's what I would encourage you to do is to start off by picking where will you define non-working hours for the upcoming week. So when I was, first building a business, I was still working full time, young child at home. And then of course, what most of us do is default to using our evenings to build up a business, right? So this was no longer sustainable. So we started out by saying, okay, I will pick 2 nights a week where I do not work. As soon as dinner's over, everything is off. The family knew when those nights were. We would plan family time together. And then on the nights that I was working, then my family wasn't quite so frustrated because we did have those pockets of time. So I started small. I started with 2 nights a week. I do not work. Then it went to 3 nights a week and all day Sunday. I do not work. And so you can kind of slowly start building in these pockets of time because for most people, it's way too hard to shift and say, I'm just not, have total life transformation. I'm going from working 20 hours down to 8. So start small and grow from there. I am now at a point from doing this for several years. I work 4.5 hours a day on school days only. And then I don't work at night and I don't work on the weekends and I take a month off every summer and run a very successful business in that pocket of time. But it was a transition from me slowly putting those processes in place, training myself and realizing, back to your everything's an emergency, we almost have to live it to realize, look, I didn't work for a night. And nothing bad happened. And my business is still growing. So it kind of feeds on itself. And you will find that the more time you start taking off and the more you start creating that harmony in your life, the more you will crave it. And it just continues to feed on itself. And it doesn't have to be an or situation. You don't have to have a successful business or a healthy lifestyle. You can have both at the same time.
Really interesting because I remember when my business started to thrive, my dad gave me a piece of advice. He goes, don't work more than 6.5 days a week. And I was like, whoa, he's like, do only a half day on Sundays. I was like, that's when you know one workaholic is giving advice to someone else who's like a workaholic in training. And it is, I think the thing that's really important is to exactly know what your strengths and weaknesses are. Like I know some people, they only work Mondays to Fridays. They don't work on their business at all on the weekends. They don't check work emails or anything. And I can't do that. Like I could never operate that way. I have to at least be aware of what's going on because I've had emergencies happen on Sunday. On a Sunday, my website, my membership platform.
And that's the thing, that depends on your business too, right? Yeah, if you're running a tech platform, you don't necessarily get to, someone's working on the weekends.
Right. So I at least need to be aware of if something happens as much as I'm not working. Like I remember going on vacations and my dad was always working while we're on vacation. And we didn't understand why he's sitting by the pool working. And now, of course, that's me because, finding that work-life balance. And I have 4 kids and maybe number 5 is on the way. We're waiting to find out. So it's like spending time with each kid requires an extra thing. And there's a lot of extra balances. Actually, my complexity has gone up as we've had more children. I'm like, oh, am I being a good dad to each of them?
Absolutely.
And that kind of factors in. And of course, we live a very different lifestyle living remotely. We have a pool at the house. We live on a tropical island where everyone's on vacation all the time. So finding those balances, but it is that thing of figuring out, am I a Monday to Friday person? And some people are, they work Monday to Friday, 8 hour. I could never work an 8-hour shift. I can't work like that. And I was like, I would rather work 5 hours a day.
I can't anymore. Now it's been so long that I have that now if I try to, I'm like, whew, I can't do it.
I would rather work 5 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that was like a decision I made. I said, oh, I can work much shorter hours every day so that I can be available. I haven't missed any moments. I was there for every kid's first steps, every kid's potty training, every kid's first word, all 4 of them. The first word was dad. I won with all of them. And like being there is like really important.
Yeah, that makes every mom out there get so frustrated.
Being there for those moments, it was like the most, because that was my one regret from my childhood, was that my dad wasn't there all the time. He was there for all the highlights. He was at every sports event, but I was like, I want to be home. That's why I work from home. But it is important, I think, for people to know how they operate. And sometimes we try to.
Yeah, and it's going to be unique for every person. Like I know some people who thrive working in the evenings and not in the mornings. Morning is their downtime. I am a morning person, so I'm not, the quality of what I produce at night, it's not good. So it aligns better for me that I would rather get up and work very early in the morning and not work at night. Whereas other people would flip that story because again, that's what works better with their body rhythm. So it's not, and this is what's so important with time management. If anyone is telling you, you have to, get up at 5 a.m. to be successful, you have to journal in the morning to be a productive entrepreneur. Anybody who's saying you have to, I would say step away from that because every single person's body chemistry, body rhythms, home life, lifestyles, businesses are so uniquely different that you need to give yourself the flexibility and freedom to define what's going to work for you, what are your core values, and how does that work within your entire home life situation as well.
I think that a lot of people make a mistake of going, this is the person I want to be like. I like their time management strategy, so I'm going to copy their day. And I've seen this happen because as a writer, I've written a lot of books and kind of how I got well known as a ghostwriter and writer. And a lot of people think all writers write a certain way. Every person I talk to has a preconcept, and I've never met another writer who writes the way I do. And I've never met 2 writers who write the same way as each other. Everyone has a completely different process. Morning, evening, longhand, computer, laptop, only at home, only this. I had a friend who could only write when he was like in a bar during the day on like a high stool seat. And I was like, that my spine would shatter. Like that's my physical and like nightmare. Like, so it's noisy, it's dirty, it's sticky, and you're sitting on a stool, which is the most uncomfortable place to sit.
On a stool.
And like I went with him one time. I was like, oh, I'll join you. And I was like, nope, this is my nightmare. So, but there's this preconception that, oh, the person I look up to or follow, I have to replicate. And I think it's important for people to realize, no, you have to take their ideas and then modify it to you and your lifestyle, because my lifestyle was different. I used to work during the day for a while. Now I only work nights because I want to work when my kids are asleep. So I'm there for them all day from when they wake up to when they go to bed. But yeah, sometimes you hear this advice, especially I know people who follow a couple of certain people like, oh, you have to get up at 4:30 to be efficient. And it's like, some people do not get it.
The whole morning routine thing.
But not for everyone.
No. And so one of the things I teach in my program is how to create a meaningful morning routine. And the first thing that we do through it is I found a very interesting study that was done years ago, that based on the old school Myers-Briggs personality type, the INEs, FJs, whatever you are, based on your personality type, there actually are very set things that you should and should not do in the morning, because it will set you up for a total disaster. And so what's interesting is when you go like research, product or entrepreneur morning routines or highly productive morning routines, they almost all look the same. You're getting up at 4:30 or 5, you're meditating, you're journaling, you're doing yoga, you're, all this quiet stuff for 2 hours. And if you are an extrovert, like that could be the worst way for you to start your day. And the realities of your home life. Well, what if you have an infant who is waking up every 3 hours? Like, how the heck are you supposed to make that work? And so that's one of the exercises I take people through is first we understand what is your morning routine personality type. And then based on that, and then based on what are kind of your boundaries? What are the realities of your morning? Or do you have do you have to get kids out the door to school at a certain time or whatnot? Then we craft what is a morning routine that's actually going to serve you. And it might only be 10 minutes for one person, and it might be 60 minutes for another. But give yourself that. I think people beat themselves up if they're like, well, everyone says this is what productive people do and it's not working for me. I'm doing something wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just probably trying to shove a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, I think this has been very interesting because for a long time I thought, I don't have the same morning routine as other people, but my business is doing great. And sometimes it takes a while to realize that it's okay to be different, that everyone has a different approach. And when I was first starting out single on my own, I was working all night, getting up at 2 p.m. every day. Can't do that with kids. They won't let you. And also there's realizing it's okay to take naps. My life is mostly naps now. I work very unusual hours, but they really work for me and my family. Maximum productivity, maximum happiness. I'm there for every moment, but it's not the 8 hours of sleep in a single block. Sounds cool. I don't have that life, but I do things in a way that works for me. But it took me a while to get okay with that, to kind of go, the result's the most important part.
Yeah.
And I think that's really when if you're having a poor result, then you need to readjust your time management. But if you're getting a really great result, maybe it's okay.
Yeah. And, I always tell people if you're doing something because you feel like you should, or it's what someone else told you, like pause, that's a sign to say, hang on, what is the desired outcome I'm looking for? And focus on that and say, now, how do I find a way to get that outcome? Just because their plan to get there looked one way doesn't mean that your plan to get there needs to look the exact same way. And again, it's kind of back to that. You need to be able to bring your unique inputs into whatever time management, as long as your time management system can accommodate your unique inputs and then give you the flexibility to create an output that is unique to you, so that if you and your friend went through the same process, you each would produce something different on the back end. You need to make sure you have a system that accommodates that. Otherwise, you're going to be trying to live something that's working for somebody else that doesn't have the inputs in the current lifestyle that you have. And it's going to set you up for failure.
I think that's a great point to land on. This has been a really interesting interview. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time. Where can people find out more about your planning system, your time management system, and just get to know you online?
So I'm very easy to find. I am Megan Sumrell on both Instagram and Facebook. So you'll be able to connect with me there. And my website is also Megan Sumrell. And if you want to see some of my planning in action, I've actually got an app in both Google Play and the App Store. It's called the Pink Bee, all one word. That is the business name. And I've got a ton of training videos in there where you can actually see how do I do weekly planning, and a bunch of other kind of planning tips and tricks there right at your fingertips as well.
Awesome. That sounds absolutely amazing. I know people are going to love it. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Serve No Master podcast. Make sure to subscribe so that together we can achieve true freedom.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Serve No Master podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll be back next week with more tips and tactics on how to escape the rat race. Please take a moment to leave a review at servenomaster.com/iTunes. It helps the show grow, and more listeners means more content for you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.